It's a foggy evening in 1810. Under the gaslight glow of London's Piccadilly, a restless crowd queues outside a dimly lit hall. They've each paid 2 shillings for a promised spectacle. Inside, on a small stage, stands a young African woman, barely clothed. Her body is accentuated by a tight, flesh-toned garment that makes her appear almost naked. A showman circles her like a handler, barking commands for her to sing, dance, turn this way and that. Eager patrons press forward and poke at her bare skin to test if she's even real. Murmurs ripple through the hall, astonishment, titillation, disgust. Hundreds of English eyes drink in the sight of her curves and unfamiliar features. On her face, the young woman wears an expression of forced calm. She meets the gawking stares head-on, staring back at the audience that treats her as something less than human. In that charged moment, the horror of her reality is laid bare. Sarah is not on display as an artist, but as a freak show exhibit, a human curiosity. How did a gentle young woman from South Africa end up in a London sideshow, subjected to such public humiliation? The answer lies in a journey of exploitation that had begun years before, a journey that would only grow more tragic. Sarah Baartman was born around 1789 in the Gamtoos River Valley of South Africa's Eastern Cape. Her family was part of the Kuko people, possibly with Xhosa ancestry. She lost her mother in infancy and her father soon after. Orphaned, she grew up working on colonial farms, surviving in a land reshaped by European settlers. Sarah kept a tortoiseshell necklace, likely her mother's, as a symbol of a life she barely remembered. By the 1790s, she made her way to Cape Town. The Dutch and British had colonized the area, forcing people like Sarah to find work in the growing port city. There, her appearance began to draw attention. She was under 5 feet tall, but strikingly curvaceous. Her full hips and buttocks, a feature called steatopygia, were common among Khoisan women, but alien to Europeans. While employed by a Dutch farmer named Hendrik Caesars, Sarah's body became a spectacle. Curious strangers began to visit. Caesars saw opportunity. He began showing her off in hospitals, to doctors and gawking visitors. One day, a Scottish military surgeon named Alexander Dunlop saw her. Dunlop wasn't just a doctor. He trafficked in oddities. Sarah's body, he believed, could be his next ticket to European fame and wealth. He proposed a contract: travel to London, appear on stage, share in the profits. Sarah, who likely didn't fully understand what was happening, agreed, on one condition. She insisted Caesars accompany her. He was familiar, perhaps more trustworthy than the doctor. In April 1810, they set sail for London. What she found across the sea would shatter whatever hope she had left. When Sarah arrived in London in 1810, Britain was in moral contradiction. The slave trade had been outlawed, yet crowds paid to see an African woman displayed like an animal. Dunlop and Caesars wasted no time. They settled in London's fashionable West End and began distributing posters. "Come see the Hottentot Venus," a living curiosity from the wilds of Africa. The name alone was disturbing. Hottentot was a racial slur. Venus was mockery. They sold her image as exotic and erotic, a fusion of otherness and sexuality. Sarah never appeared fully nude. That would have broken the law. But she wore tight, transparent costumes that revealed every curve, turning her into an object of spectacle. Under the stage lights, she sang traditional songs, danced, and posed on command. For an extra fee, spectators were allowed to step forward and touch her. One part of the act brought her to tears. The moment strangers groped her. It was the most degrading part of the show, and it happened every night. To British audiences, she was not a woman, but a curiosity, a scientific puzzle, a racial symbol, something to marvel at, mock, or study. Crowds grew, so did attention. Scientists, artists, journalists, and London's elite came to see her. Sarah Baartman became infamous, the most talked about woman in London. But not everyone watched in silence. Abolitionists were horrified. They argued her treatment was just slavery by another name, wrapped in lights, cloaked in profit. By November 1810, the public debate reached a boiling point. Sarah's case was taken to court, heard before the King's Bench, one of Britain's highest legal bodies. They asked, was Sarah free? Or was she being held against her will? She was brought to court, dressed in fine clothing, smiling quietly. Through an interpreter, she claimed she wasn't mistreated, that she shared profits, that she would return home in 5 years. But no one really believed it. Most historians now agree. Sarah was likely coached. The contract was a sham, but her testimony was enough. The case was dismissed. The court allowed the show to go on. Legally, Sarah was free. In reality, she remained trapped, under control, humiliated, and powerless. Ironically, the trial made her more famous. The press coverage drew bigger crowds. Sarah's suffering became a national sensation and business boomed again. Her handler, Caesars, told critics, "She has as much right to exhibit herself as an Irish giant or a dwarf." As if that settled the question of her dignity, she continued touring, city to city, fair to fair. Sometimes she was even baptized and paraded as a married woman to present a false sense of normal life. But make no mistake, Sarah Baartman's existence in Britain was no different from bondage. Her body was owned, her movements dictated, her silence forced. Even as the spotlight followed her, it became a prison. The novelty wore thin. The crowds began to shrink. Her so-called guardians began looking elsewhere. By 1814, they found a new buyer, a new city, and a new level of horror. In September 1814, Sarah Baartman was sent across the English Channel to France. Not as a guest, not as a performer, but as property. She had been sold. She arrived in Paris under the care of a man named Henry Taylor, who handed her over to Jean Riot, a showman and animal trainer. To him, she was merchandise. Paris welcomed her with the same twisted fascination as London. But here she had no legal defense, no abolitionists, no courtroom, no one to question what was done to her. Riot displayed her in traveling shows and upper-class parties. He placed her beside animals. He even put a collar around her neck to blur the line between woman and beast. She was now seen as both spectacle and specimen. At wealthy Parisian salons, she was the surprise finale, a rare creature brought in to shock and amuse the elite. At one such party, she was reportedly forced to crawl like an animal, while guests laughed, toasted, and tossed coins. Her name was forgotten. She was just Venus. But something darker was brewing. France's top scientists had taken notice. They were obsessed with racial types. Sarah's body was a prize they wanted to study. They believed Khoisan women had primitive anatomy. A myth about an elongated labia fueled their desire to examine her, to prove their racist theories true. Renowned naturalist Georges Cuvier, Napoleon's own anatomist, took personal interest. He arranged for her to be studied at the Jardin du Roi. There, artists sketched her naked. Anatomists inspected her without consent. She was prodded, measured, compared to animals, always without dignity. Some said she agreed to pose. Others say she refused to remove the sacred cloth that covered her genitals. But in the end, they undressed her anyway. These were not studies. They were violations, justified by the name of science. Sarah was reduced to nothing but a theory in the making. As winter set in, Sarah's health deteriorated. The long years of cold, stress, humiliation, and hunger took their toll. She was only 26, but her body was failing. France was in crisis after Napoleon's fall. Fewer people came to see her. Her captors made less money. Some believed they forced her into prostitution. In a brothel on Rue du Cours des Fontaines, Sarah was reportedly seen working. Whether coerced or abandoned, she had nowhere else to go. On December 29, 1815, Sarah Baartman died. The cause was vague, maybe pneumonia, maybe syphilis. But it wasn't just disease that killed her. It was Europe. She died penniless, in a foreign land, surrounded by strangers who had caged, touched, mocked, and studied her. But even in death, Sarah Baartman was not allowed to rest. Sarah Baartman's body had barely cooled before the scientists claimed her. Georges Cuvier, the man who studied her in life, requested her corpse for dissection. He got it. Cuvier didn't seek to honor Sarah. He wanted to prove a theory that Africans were closer to animals than Europeans. Her death became his opportunity. In early 1816, he began the procedure. He removed her brain, her organs, her genitalia. Her skeleton was boiled down, her flesh stripped. She was unmade. Cuvier made a plaster cast of her body, preserving her curves in death as they had been ogled in life. It became part of his collection. He pickled her brain and reproductive organs in alcohol and put them in jars. She was now an exhibit, a permanent one. Cuvier published a report. In it, he called Sarah intelligent, graceful, fluent in multiple languages. But then he compared her to an orangutan. He claimed her ears were animal-like, that her movements were ape-like. His conclusions were embraced across Europe. Other scientists used Sarah's remains to claim black people were sexually primitive, that African women were biologically different, inferior. Her body became evidence in the construction of a racist hierarchy, white at the top, black at the bottom. Sarah wasn't just exploited, she was weaponized. Her plaster cast, skeleton, and organs were put on display in Paris museums. Tourists came to stare. Generations stared. They posed her with her back turned to emphasize her buttocks, the same feature that made her famous, the same feature that destroyed her. She became a silent exhibit, labeled and arranged for maximum effect. No name, no voice. Just the Hottentot Venus under glass. For over 150 years, Sarah Baartman was a museum object, not a woman, not a person, just a story told through bones and skin. It wasn't until the 1970s that her display was finally removed. Her remains were stored out of view. But she was still trapped in Europe, still waiting to go home. For over a century, Sarah Baartman's remains sat in French museums, stripped of humanity, culture, and name. But her people never forgot her. In South Africa, poets and activists spoke her name. She became a symbol of colonial cruelty, of black womanhood, of dignity stolen and never returned. In 1998, South African poet Diana Ferris wrote a poem titled, "I Have Come to Take You Home." That poem helped spark an international movement. By then, apartheid had ended. A new South Africa was rising. And in 1994, President Nelson Mandela made an official request to France. Bring Sarah Baartman home. It took years. France resisted. Laws had to be changed. But in 2002, the French Parliament passed a bill authorizing the return of her remains. On May 6, 2002, Sarah's preserved skeleton, bottled organs, and plaster cast were flown to South Africa. For the first time in 192 years, she came home. She was greeted not with gawking eyes, but with silence, reverence, mourning. A plane carried her like a queen, wrapped in the colors of her people. In August 2002, thousands gathered in Hanky, her birthplace. Chiefs, elders, and children stood on the soil she once walked as a girl. They buried her on a hilltop called Vergederingskop. Stones were laid, prayers spoken. The sun shone over the Gamtoos Valley. Sarah was finally at peace. The date, August 9th, was Women's Day in South Africa, a day for honoring strength, endurance, and voices that history tried to silence. Sarah Baartman was home, not as the Hottentot Venus, not as a caste or a curiosity, but as a woman, a daughter of the land, and a symbol of return. Sarah Baartman's life was stolen by spectacle. Her body was used to entertain, to theorize, to dehumanize. But in death, she became something her captors never expected, a voice. Today, she stands as a symbol of racial injustice, of how science, entertainment, and empire all conspired to destroy one woman, and how that woman still rose to tell her story. Schools now teach her name. Museums remember her differently. Statues honor her. A district in South Africa bears her name. She is no longer forgotten. Her story forces us to ask, what does justice look like for the voiceless? How do we honor those whose dignity was erased? The answer is remembrance. It's in the return of her bones, in poems, in films, in stories like this one, shared across time so she can never be erased again. Sarah Baartman was once treated as less than human, but now she reminds us of what it means to be human, to see others, to resist silence, to remember. She is no longer a Venus made for strangers' eyes. She is Sarah, a woman, a survivor, a truth that refused to stay buried.